Hey there, and welcome to Work Dope, a podcast on the messiness and the potential of human beings working. I am Linda Stacy, and I am a corporate sellout, but I am a corporate innovator. And I like to think that working in corporate America doesn't have to suck, even though a lot of employees think that it does. By some statistics, up to 80% of workers are unsatisfied at work. And this leads to disengagement and huge costs for organizations. People are expecting more and more to get all of their fulfillment from work, and yet they're so dissatisfied at the same time. And the pandemic, the great resignation, all of this has forced us to take a look at the quality of life and what culture really means for people inside of organizations. And I always like to say that I think that business and building things, organizations, I think it's amazing what companies are able to do, especially when they are really focused on real world problems. And that when people are successful in business, this is fundamental to the best of what human beings can actually do and create in the world. Today, I am talking to Amanda Layden, who is the CEO and founder of the Firebrand Institute. Amanda does corporate strategy work as a consultant, and she also does diversity and equity and inclusion work within organizations. Amanda has also recently launched From Period to Pause, where she champions women's healthcare. She wants to help women have better conversations with their healthcare providers and help them to find their voice within the healthcare system and take back their healthcare journeys. This idea of women finding their voice also applies to the work that she does in corporate, and it applies to what I'm doing with Work Dope. This conversation is so rich. As with all of my guests, I talk with Amanda about her career journey, which doesn't look like a straight line by any means, but when you look back, it kind of seems to make sense. One thing that came up organically in the conversation were ideas around self-esteem, which is interesting. This is beginning to be a bit of a thread. It came up in episode 9 and also in episode 8. Episode 9 was completely focused on self-esteem, but episode 8 with Jerry and Christy, the relational therapists, that was a key element, that self-esteem issues are really at the base of everything that kind of can go wrong when humans try to relate to each other. So a big issue. We talk about respect in the workplace. We talk about values and how all of these things are on a spectrum. And, what I believe and what you believe about what these things mean can vary so much, and how we really need to be focused on, yes, our values and who we are, what we bring to the workplace, but also what does the organization do? Are we thinking broadly enough? Are we really kind of getting outside of some of the petty things that can sometimes happen? So we do talk about egregious and petty things that happen in the workplace. I think it's important that we talk about these things so that we can have more tools to address them as they happen in our environments. So let's get going. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Amanda as much as I enjoyed having it with her. I'm really excited to see where the conversation takes us. So thanks for being here, Amanda. I am thrilled to get your experiences and insights. I am so excited that we got to meet back in the day, whatever, I think in 2017 or 18.
I think so. Yeah, I think we've known each other since 2017. Is that right? And who knows what time is now? Is it sped up? Is it slowed down? The past couple of years in the world have just created new challenges and changed things and also shifted perspective.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. There's a lot of questioning of what's going on in the workspace and in other parts of the world. So it'll be great to hear what we have to say about this. One thing I'd like to ask every guest that I have on is I like to touch base in terms of fluidity of career, especially if younger people ever listen to there doesn't have to be one pathway that we expected maybe when we were in college, or maybe we didn't expect. So I'd like to kind of have a sense of maybe who you were in high school, college, and where that led and whether it was what you expected.
Absolutely not. From high school and college, I had really gone into thinking about my career, going to college, thinking I would be a lawyer. So from a very young age, I was pretty good at arguing. I was also pretty good at being able to see gaps in people's thinking that they couldn't see. And so that really led me on a path that I thought I was going to be an attorney. And really I was going to be an attorney because my dad was one, and that was sort of the career path I saw. And plus people just thought, whenever I would speak to them, especially if we were in a toe-to-toe argument, I would beat them with my words. So that was, and from a very young age, I was very, I was well-read. I love to read. Reading is one of my favorite hobbies. And I've always loved the written word. And so I'm a pretty good oh my gosh, I can't even say that word. I'm a pretty good what am I? No, I'm a pretty good speaker. And I knew that even at a young age. Even in high school, I was in a, was that high school? No, actually it was junior high. I was in on a mock trial team, and I won the case for us because I was able to see the nuances and solve the issue and like kind of hit the people on the stand really where they needed to be hit and be able to win the case for our team. So that's what I thought I was going to be. I went to undergrad to be a lawyer. And I also studied French. So it got to, I guess I was taking the LSAT, and it got to where it was time for me to apply to law schools. And I kind of had this, I woke up and I was like, you know what? I don't think this is what I want to be. Like maybe at some point in my life, there's probably only one time in my life, which is right now, where I wish I would have studied constitutional law. But I ended up going to business school. So I ended up getting my MBA instead of getting my law degree and going into business. I'm going to say that, but by no means was this a straight path. I then went into the wine industry. So I studied wine for 4 or 5 years in London. And I worked in the wine trade. So I had this business degree, kind of wasn't sure what I should do with that, had this undergrad law degree, and then went to wine school. And now modern day, present day, I should say, I'm a consultant. And I also am an advocate and activist, I would say. And, so it's definitely not a straight path. My husband was joking with me the other night. He said, I feel like you've lived 9 lives. Like you're like a cat. And I'm like, kinda. And isn't that great? Because I bring this wealth of experience. I've lived abroad. I lived abroad for a decade. I've traveled to like over 45 countries, and I just bring a different perspective to my work. And to the people that I encounter. So that was a really long answer.
But so it's interesting though, because it's not a straight path, but often when we look back, things do kind of make sense when you look back. Did you go straight from undergrad to grad school? Was there a break in there?
I did. I went straight. I was, basically I had a work study program that I was a part of, and starting in my freshman year to help put me through college. And I worked at our Ticketmaster, our local Ticketmaster outlet. So I was selling tickets and also selling tickets to our sporting events and things. And long story short, the boss of like the arena, and who was my boss at the Ticketmaster outlet, ended up leaving his role my senior year in college. And they didn't have anybody that they knew could understand, could like run the sports teams, kind of like ticketing finances, knew how to set up vendors in the system, knew how to put concerts on sale. Like those were back in the days where people had to queue to get a ticket to go to a concert. And they said, if you take over this job, we're going to give you more of a stipend. And if you stay, we'll pay for you to go to grad school and give you a living stipend. And so I did.
Wow.
But I should tell you, I flunked math in college. That's how bad I thought I was at math and at numbers. And then here you go, you fast forward a few years and I'm all of a sudden taking quant and statistics.
Wow. Wow. So tell me about the reading. This is kind of a personal thing for me. I was not quick to read as a young person. And now I read constantly. It's, again, one of my favorite pastimes. It feels like indulgent a lot of the time, whether it's business oriented or not. When did yours start?
Oh, from a very young age. So I think my parents said I started reading early. Like I was one of these kids who was reading by like, I'm probably wrong, but like 2 or 3, like I could read full sentences. And so I started reading as soon as I could. I was one of the kids who, you get the summer reading list and you have to check off what you read during the summer. I would be done with the reading list on like the second week
Wow.
of summer break. And I would be the kid like with the stack of the library books, like the nerdy kid with the stack of the library books, like
Yep.
leaving. So I've always been a voracious reader. I also think that part of it is it was an escapism for me. I didn't grow up in a healthy environment in my household. I grew up in a pretty abusive household. And so it was an escape for me. It was a way that I could imagine a different place to be than where I was.
Yeah. Yeah. I see that. Wow. That's an early age to start reading. I am now the nerdy kid with the library. I certainly wasn't then. And I don't think I ever read what was on the reading list. So, and
oh man, they would be like, oh, Amanda Layden, what did you do this summer? Let us get, the teachers would be like, let us guess. Oh, when did you, and extra credit, you did all of those too.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Too funny. You shared in that podcast, the other podcast that I listened to that you were on, about an experience early in your career where and I wasn't clear if you and the male colleague worked on a presentation together or it was your presentation and then
it was mine.
It was yours.
Yeah, it was mine. So I think the story you're referring to is I had to put together a presentation for a client. This was early on in my career. Before I actually left the United States to go to the UK to study wine. And we went to walk into the boardroom to meet with these clients. And like, before we go in, I'm like having a conversation with a colleague, all right, like, what parts am I going to do? What are you going to do? And he was like, oh, honey, you're not going to do any of this. Just give me the presentation and you sit there and look pretty.
Wow. Was there a big age difference between you?
Oh, there was, he was probably a decade older, maybe 15 years older.
Yeah. I'm just curious. The age really isn't relevant. It's just, but I had certain things, similar things happen to me in probably my very late 20s, early 30s, and my first quote unquote real jobs. It just so like demoralizing, and really, I was personally brought down emotionally by it all. And I decided that I was going to wear a blazer every day. I was working in an academic library at the time. Speaking of libraries, and I chose to, a student doesn't wear a blazer, because I was getting confused as students. I was not being taken seriously. My colleague who had the same amount of tenure was older, but he had jackets with the patches on the elbows, and people would call him professor. And because of the way our office was arranged, they thought I was his assistant. I mean, it was crazy. It was crazy. But I'm curious if you ever think back to a different way that you would have done it, or if you had a niece that experienced this, or like, do you have any, being the vocal advocate that you are today, what are words that someone could say in that moment? It's tough because there's risk there. And when you're early in your career, there's more at stake.
I think, I'm not sure. So let me think about the words for a second. One of the things, it was demoralizing. I mean, you bring that up, and it doesn't make you want to work for that organization or to do your best job or to put in all of the effort. I think now where I sit, there was a power differential. There's power, somebody being your boss and having power that they can fire you. And, I don't have a family to fall back on. Like, I bring in my own livelihood. Mm-hmm. So that was very scary. I think now I would just say to young women that you do have power, you do have voice, and you can say, well, then no, I'm not going to go into this room and present at all. Or this is my presentation, and I'm happy to divvy up the work, considering that you're the liaison, or the liaison on this project, and you're the project lead. However, there has to be a fair division of labor here so that I am also seen and heard in this meeting. Mm-hmm. I would probably have said something like that. Or honestly, knowing how I roll now, and if I didn't have huge self-esteem back then. Mm-hmm. My self-esteem was actually pretty low, and that may be hard to believe considering like who you see today. In all honesty, like, had I been me now and look back then, I just would have walked out.
So self-esteem, actually 2 episodes ago was all about self-esteem. I think it's a huge thing to be built and to be addressed straight on. So you would have walked out, and and you would have risked potentially losing the job. And in hindsight, you kind of see that you were okay with it. You may not have been okay with it at the time, though. I mean, I had a terrible thing happen early, and I had massive student debt. I had there was pressure. And I think that there's for women, for anyone who doesn't have resources, there's more at stake, right?
I think in retrospect, I would, say to myself at that age, go get a bartending job or go wait tables. Anything is better than experiencing this and being demoralized and demeaned in the workplace. There are other places you can choose to go work and probably make as much money, if not more, than what I was making in that job anyway, for the kind of, blatant sexual, misogynistic. That wasn't the only incident that happened. There were other things that happened that really were not okay, especially in this day and age. Like, these things would not fly. But I would, if there are young women listening to this, I would say you can take back your power and your voice, and you can take onus over the situation, and you can choose not to deal with any of that, especially because you are worthy and you are of value and you have something more to give. If that company doesn't respect that and doesn't respect you, then move on.
There's a need for change in these spaces. And I feel like maybe women, or whoever they are, whoever is in this position, should leave kicking and screaming, so that there's something at stake for the company too.
Yeah. Sorry, Linda, I just interrupted you, because now anything can blow up with a tweet. Anything can blow up with a Facebook post. I mean, we see things leaked all of the time, and we know that companies are in a precarious position if things like that happen, especially at the higher ranks of an organization. Right. If more than one woman comes forward and says, this is my experience, or not even a woman, however you identify, this is my experience. I'm not saying that everybody needs to be a whistleblower or things need to be blown out of proportion. However, especially in this day and age where people are deciding the types of companies they want to work for, they're deciding if they're aligned with their values, they're deciding if you really respect your employees. It's really important now, and things can happen with the stroke of a button now. We're in a different era.
Respect was something actually I wanted to bring up, that we need to be treating others with respect. We need to be treated with respect. And some of me wonders if that means the same thing to everyone. What does it mean for you? And so how would you define it? How do you know you're being respected?
Oh my gosh, these are some doozies, Linda. I think you go back to creating space. Part of it, I think, is I feel respected and valued when people understand and give me or allow me to leverage my skill sets and unique DNA in a way that does greater good for them or their organization. And that they understand that I come to the table with a certain level of expertise, and they allow me to be in that position. Like, when I say allow, it's like, sometimes you go into a room and people are dismissive of your ideas or dismissive of your consulting, and, really understanding that there's a reason why we're working together. And part of it is because you have an expertise, I have an expertise, and I'm allowed to showcase that and highlight it in a way that's for the betterment of the people and the organization. The other thing is, I don't always work with people where we have the same values. We don't have the same background. We may come with a very different lens on the world. And I think part of what's been lost lately in our world is really understanding that differences can be positive and differences can be a strength, and being able to listen to one another and at least value that I might have a different opinion than you.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what I spoke about in the self-esteem episode. It was part of it, was that differences are really meant to, if we're being our best selves, acting from a place of our gifts and strengths, we're really looking at those to be curious and not to do a one up, one down type of thing, which then feeds into the whole where things just get less easy to work together, more challenges ensue in your client facing situations?
Well, and here's the thing about that too. I'm really actually inspired, or I don't know if that's the right word, but kind of energized by the younger generations of women that are coming up. When I was growing up, and I don't know about you, but we were really taught to pit ourselves against one another as women. We were taught to otherize, to shame, to blame. And I'm seeing this group of very forthright, empowered, righteous, full of vigor, like these women who are stepping into their own power and not tearing one another down. I mean, sure, does it happen in social media and everywhere else? Yeah, I hear the horror stories, but I'm also seeing this group of women that are like, if I rise, you rise.
Mm-hmm.
If, like, I'm loving that. I'm loving watching that. So that was not my experience.
Yeah, me neither. And actually, my sister was telling me her son is just finished high school and he went to prom. He went to 2 proms because he goes to an all boys school. So he went to the all girls school prom, and it was him and like 8 girls. And I'm like, how did he, none of them had dates. And when I was in high school, you'd have the couple of people who went stag. That's what it was called. Right. But you kind of had to have a date. But for me, I was telling my sister, I'm like, I wanted a date. I was kind of boy crazy. And I think that too was part of what we grew up in. And she was saying, because she was there when they were taking pictures and everything, she said, Linda, these young women are completely different from who I was at that age. They are confident. They're having a great time as a group of 8 to 10 women going out. I do think you're right. It's happening. And I know it's something that I'm working on regularly, to look at women in the eye and not be judging based on all of the BS stuff that was kind of imprinted on me growing up in Southern California in terms of how you look is it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I know we're kind of getting off track, but even like the body positivity that's going on, that didn't exist when we were growing up. I mean, I love it. I love that these young women are just really like owning who they are and not needing the external to tell them who they are, not needing to have a date or be partnered up to tell them who they are. It's just, to me, I'm just like, this is awesome. And everybody needs to see like all sides of this, that women are amazing as they are.
Right. And it's going to be continuing to filter into the workforce. I've been at the same company for almost 20 years. So I feel like I've seen the changes, because our population is kind of constant. It's pretty much coming from Ivy League. It's fairly white. Most of the time it's male dominated, most of the classes, but it's interesting because some of the aspects are consistent, but to see the change over time in this population, if you will, it's almost like I have my own little longitudinal study. I'd like to kind of highlight any other egregious things that you experienced at work or that you're aware of that maybe have come up in your consulting that you are okay to share, keeping things private if you need to.
So it's really funny you say that. I recently was in London and I saw some former colleagues while I was there, one in particular whom I adore. And she and I were talking about all of the ridiculous things that used to happen at the company we worked for. I had left the wine industry by this point. So this was not in the wine space. This was in the HR technology space. And first and foremost, my immediate boss, we were in Orlando for our conference. We hosted an annual conference where our CEO would speak, and then we would bring in like these really well-known speakers. And it was, we did these kind of thought leadership events throughout the world, but the American one, the one in the United States, was our flagship event. I was there. My role at the time, I was director of global corporate communications. So I also wrote a lot of our CEO's speeches and things. And had to work pretty closely with him. Anyway, my direct boss said something to one of my employees while we were there. And I said, you know what? It's not okay that you have that conversation with him. That's not appropriate. I don't even remember what the conversation was, but it was something that was out of line. So I said, that's not appropriate. You really can't do that. And he turned around to me and he said, well, that's fine. You think that, Amanda, but you know what you actually need in your life? And I said, well, what's that? He said, you would do a lot better in your life if you had more religion in your life.
Wow.
And I was like, religion? First of all, you don't even know my religion or if I have one. Secondly, this is a workplace. And that's what you just said to me. Needless to say, I didn't last long at the company after that. So that was one thing. This same organization, they were one of their headquarters was based out of the Midwest. And it was like, I got moved there. I got moved from London to the Midwest. I only lasted there 5 months. And everybody was like, what church group do you go to? They would ask me at work and I would say, I don't. And then they wouldn't speak to me again because I didn't ascribe to whatever their religious things were. But the crazy thing about all of that is that they were all having sex with one another and cheating on their spouses. Wow. So this often I was talking about this with my friend in London. This workplace was like a high school it was the most ridiculous place I've ever worked. Oh, and then I found out, she and I were talking, we were swapping all these stories that happened. They tried to push somebody else out of the organization and they forged emails.
Wow.
And when the attorneys went back to like do the due diligence to figure out what was going on, they found like, okay, what you're saying she sent and you sent doesn't actually match up. Somebody actually created the timestamp and the like location. Like it's impossible for this to have gone because she was on a flight at such and such time. And that was before I think we had, international Wi-Fi and all those things. So, I mean, those were the kinds of things I was seeing them do. And at that particular organization, we were an HR tech company. We also sold leadership development solutions in organizations. And it was like the cobbler's shoes, right? Yeah. We treated our people so badly. And the CEO was awful. He was literally the worst person I think I've ever worked for in my life. And that's saying a lot. And he was so awful that he was actually who inspired me to start my business because I didn't want people to go to work not feeling valued and not feeling joy.
Yeah. So in your work now, this is a tough one because I have to think that the people who are seeking you out they're already bought in, right?
Yeah, for the most part, I think there's so much going on in the world right now that leaders are just having a tough time navigating everything that's happening. And so part of why they seek us out sometimes or why we work with them is that they want to put better policies, procedures, strategies in place to support their people. They recognize there might be some gaps in how they've been operating. They want to open up conversations to really create psychological safety and a safe space for all people to have a conversation about whatever it is that might be going on. In my case, with one of my organizations, Period to Pause, it's really all around helping women to get voice and gain their power back when it comes to their healthcare journey and their healthcare needs from period to menopause and everything in between. And so we're bringing some of these conversations into the workplace, such as menopause. I mean, most workplaces don't have policies in place to support women going through menopause. I was talking to somebody recently and she was talking about how she was like, I wouldn't even call it a hot flash. It probably has a different terminology, but she started to sweat profusely while she's presenting to a team of leaders, like dripping with sweat because of her hormones, and people are just ignoring it, and it's like, we need something in place where she could say, I'm really sorry, but I'm going through menopause right now. There's a lot going on with my hormones. I just kind of haven't cracked this nut yet. Can we just take a 5-minute recess and let me cool down and compose myself and come back? But instead, like, she just powers through and like, they just ignore it. So, these are the things where we need to start talking about this stuff.
Yeah. I heard that in the other podcast that there's so many of these topics are taboo. I think a lot of things that happen at work don't get talked about other than like the water cooler and maybe when you catch up with your friends years later. And so much is happening that is just not cool. And I too have seen people at the front of the room and something crazy is happening and no one is like you said, acknowledging it or addressing it or helping or, supporting. It's an interesting situation. There's something I want to bring up. And if you don't want to talk about it, it's totally cool. But You had shared last year or the year before when you were doing a talk, and I think you were doing some kind of leadership talk. And afterwards you were sharing that it was just really weird. Like that,
It
is this
was
recalling it?
horrible.
Okay. I'm curious about this because I've had this too. And I think that depending on who you are and like how you're built and what your like spidey senses are like, this type of energy, whatever it is that I'd hope you explain or describe, I think can be really like just like a suck on a lot of people's energy if it exists in an organization. So anything that you can share about it.
Yeah. I mean, so I was hired by a very well-known organization. Just happened to be in the news again, what, yesterday, the day before, for some very questionable practices. And I was, part of like their keynote. Well, it was more than a keynote. It was like a workshop for 3 hours. It was the worst thing I've ever delivered in my life. Maybe some of it was on me, but it was really more about the organization and the toxicity that runs through the workplace. People were rude. They were dismissive. They started doing other things. The way the leader introduced me was cringeworthy. The way he introduced me was something like, well, this is Amanda Layden. She's supposed to be good, but who knows? Jury's still out.
Wow.
Why are you going to introduce me like that? Then everybody's
Right.
going to be like, this is going to suck.
Right.
And I literally at the end of that, so I was mic'd, I was being recorded. So I was talking to my camera guy while that was happening, because I would put it on mute while they were doing exercises. And I was literally saying like on the camera, this is the worst thing I've ever experienced in my life. Like, this is terrible. And they went out on a boat that evening and I was going to not go because I was like, that was I never want to see these people again. And I called my husband and he was like, nope, you're going to get out there. You're going to go show who you are. And you're going to have a brave face and you're going to put it on. So I did. And I went, but yeah, it was just the epitome of, toxic, like kind of like locker room boys, that kind of culture. The founder is very well known for that. And it just permeates the entire organization.
Were there many women in that audience?
I would say it's 50-50.
Okay.
And even some of the women were worse. Was it 50-50? Maybe it was 60-40 men. But these people also, they're kind of like, it's almost like a version of, I don't want to use this term lightly, but kind of modern day slavery. After the boat, like most companies, when they're having like a little bit of a knees up, they might have a drink at the bar, they're hanging out. These people went straight back up to their hotel rooms and stayed working. So they probably got home at 10 and who knows what time they stopped working. So it's like, as much as you may want to work there on your resume, one, the culture is very well known for being toxic. Two, what about quality of life?
I know. Right.
For what? What's it for?
Right.
But yeah, I mean, that's what I have to say about that. I will never, unless they pay me like millions of dollars, work for that organization again. There have been a lot of consultants which have gone in to try to help rectify some of, I would say, the hangover from the founder. But it's a lot of it's just kind of lip service. I think once like the water has been poisoned, it's really hard to get the poison out of the well.
Yeah, I'm curious about the people who are attracted. You said it might be nice to have this on your resume, and they must be a young workforce who's just going to get through it for a few years, realizing that it'll be good for them, the connections. I mean, what else? Are these people going to hit serious like meltdowns in their mid 40s that like, oh my God, what have I been doing for life? I don't know, but
probably. I mean, I think there's generous pay. They get stocks probably, right? And it does look good on your resume, especially people knowing what kind of grueling culture it is, depending upon what division of the company people work in. This is one particular division. I'm not saying anymore that the rest of the divisions are like that, but this one in particular was. So it was really, really fascinating. It's really true. Like, that's really, truly a case study. And like, who do we put first? Are we putting the Wall Street first in terms of what we're expected to earn? Or are we putting our people first? And yeah, I'm not going to name the company because I don't want that coming back on
absolutely.
me. But it's really interesting when you start to say, I'm leading this group of people and I'm a CEO or I'm a people leader. And what toll is this having on burnout, on stress, on people and their families?
Right.
It's
is it required? I mean, we talk about quality of life, but the company can still be successful. No,
I would think so. Unless they're under such market pressure to bring things to market that it's, right. I've always wondered that too, Linda, because I think about there surely are other ways to be successful rather than working people to the bone. It just says to me sometimes like, you're probably not being very clear with your priorities, and you're not being very clear about expectations or what you're asking of people,
Yeah. Yeah. And in some of the other reading that I'm doing, that's not completely, it's related. I'm doing a lot of reading around relational tools, so even things that are directed towards couples, some of it can kind of be applied towards what's happening here. And, if there's addiction of any sort, you're going to have a lot of issues, and that addiction has to be corrected before anything else can be addressed. And so these people who form companies or who are the CEO, many of them are likely workaholics. And then that is bleeding into the rest of the organization. So it really is toxicity.
I think they should do a study on like these top CEOs who've become really successful and how many of them are actual narcissists and like egomaniacs.
Right.
I think a lot of them are, but I don't think that's the only way to become successful. You see other, not that I've ever worked with him, but you see somebody like a Richard Branson. And I'm like, there's a lot to be said for what I think is a probably very human-centered, compassionate style of leadership. I don't know because I've never worked for the guy, but at least like seeing on the outside the types of endeavors they're doing and how much people have to say about loving to work for his organizations. I also think you see that trickle down through the experiences. Like if you've ever flown on Virgin, it's a very unique experience. I think the same, like, I don't know anything about JetBlue's CEO, but I love flying JetBlue. I fly at every opportunity I can because I love the seats, but I also love the people. I just flew from New York to London on JetBlue, and like I had the best flight attendants. Like they were so kind. And I'm like, this must speak to whatever's going on at the top in terms of how we establish our culture, and knowing and understanding there's a direct line between how we treat our employees and how they're going to treat our customers.
Absolutely. I think that Southwest has a similar vibe for sure. I'm not on it very much. My husband has done United his entire career. And so I have status because he has status. So I'm often on United, but I was on a Southwest flight, and it was just amazing how those flight attendants were even. And I do think that there's something to what those CEOs bring in terms of their experience. And I've heard some of them talk. I heard one of the CEOs of Walmart, I heard on a podcast, and he just had a really diverse background. He had kind of come up through the ranks. And I really feel that makes a difference, that CEO sees everyone in the organization because he or she has been everyone in the organization. And I think that can make such a big difference. And if you're consumer facing like that, man, it's going to make a difference in how effective you are as a company.
Right. And I think this goes back to like some conversations too around diversity and neurodiversity. You were talking about the company you work for being like a lot of Ivy League, maybe a lot of white men. And even if it is Ivy League and maybe they're a person of color, there's a lot to be said for neurodiversity and for understanding that different skill sets, when they come to bear, really make an organization more dynamic, more fruitful, more innovative. And so I love, like, even with what IBM's doing right now, where they no longer require you to have a college degree to get a job at IBM. That's amazing, because we look at these generations now that are coming up and all of the skill sets that they're teaching themselves, the ways that they're able to use coding languages, for example, or even understanding social media to a certain extent. Like there's so many skill sets I don't even think we know about yet that are really going to be able to help these companies move into the future, and move into the future in a sustainable way that looks at how people can contribute with their true skill set, rather than on the slip of paper.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That sounds very exciting. I'm going to have to look into what IBM is doing. Yeah, that sounds great. In terms of leadership excellence overall, what do you think the big gaps are?
Hmm. Well, I think part of it is what we were just talking about, which is understanding that human beings aren't linear, and there is a real true lived experience that people in your organizations have, and being able to say, how do we harness like that lived experience in a way that makes us better, and not pitting people against one another within the organization. I'm seeing it happen more and more now, but I think for a while there was a real gap around empathy
Mm-hmm.
and being empathetic, and really leading with that to understand what your people might be going through. I also see oftentimes like people who are, like making decisions in the ivory tower, so to speak, they have no concept of how work actually gets done.
Yeah.
And there's unrealistic expectations on their people.
Mm-hmm.
They've no concept. So I think leaders, if they truly want to be excellent and show up as their authentic selves, but also showing their whole human beings, I think number one, they do have to lead in that way. Number two, they have to spend more time with the people on the ground and really understand what it takes to do their roles.
Yeah. If you had to guess, what do you think is the resistance around that? Is it not knowing or thinking you know better?
I think part of it is that they're in a protective bubble sometimes. So they're surrounded by a lot of yes people who aren't pushing back. And when we talk about people being able to use their voices and use it in a constructive way, I'm seeing that happen more now, but there has been, again, back to that power differential. You're here and I'm here. And so I don't think they have enough people around them that are challenging them in the right ways.
Right. So when you talk about using your voice in a constructive way, I have been witness to people kind of like shit just comes kind of flying out of their mouths, like, kind of reactive. They're finally saying something and it's not constructive,
No.
but there's something important in there. There's some truth in there. And how do we teach people who maybe are on the front lines to be more constructive in the way they're bringing their value? I mean, it's their value. It's what they know about the work. It's about making the company better in the long run, if we're framing this the right way.
I think sometimes, as much as there's a gap at the top of not understanding what people are doing on the ground level or mid-level management or whatever it might be, the same gap exists, but in reverse. So people really don't understand what pressures leaders are under, CEOs, the C-suite, even the leader of your division. And so, part of it, I think, is trying to understand, how does this machine actually operate? And the machine of your organization you're working for, get curious. What are the various departments? How do they all fit in together? And if you really care about the work you're doing, I know some people just want to go to work. They want to do their job. They want to go home and get a paycheck. Totally fine with that. That's everybody's personal choice. But if you truly understand and you do want to make a difference in an organization, you need to educate yourself first. And if you don't know the answer, then figure out somebody who does that you can talk to. It's your responsibility also as an employee to learn what it is your business does.
Yeah.
And so learning a little bit about that, but also being able to put yourself in the leader's shoes. And I always say, like, if there's something that's really upsetting you, take a moment to breathe, write down the facts and take the emotion out of it, and understand how your leader that you're going to talk about this communicates. If there's somebody with a more straightforward style, bottom line it. Give them the information they need to know. So, rather than just like, a word vomit, really figure out how that leader communicates, what pressures they might be under, and almost like formulate it in terms of a case study. There's also something to be said sometimes for power in numbers. So if people are having a shared experience, and you recognize there's a way that the company could shift some policies or be more supportive, then sometimes it's helpful to work with another colleague to come up with a potential plan to present it to your leadership.
Mm-hmm. Yep, those are fantastic suggestions and ideas around that. Have you ever addressed a colleague, like a direct peer, with feedback because you knew that a certain behavior wasn't serving them?
Yes, with permission.
Okay. Yep.
I mean, it used to be, in my younger, more rogue years, it used to be I would just say what I felt. I've learned to temper that a little bit, and then now to ask permission. So I can give you an example. There's somebody I'm doing some work with, and there's a style of communication where it's pretty relaxed, which is totally fine. That's this person's style of communication. They also use, when speaking to people, a lot of filler words. You know what I mean? Well, no, you need to articulate that. And so, I've kind of mentioned to this person, would you like some feedback after that presentation so that perhaps you can work on your delivery? You'd be taken more seriously if those things came out and if you were firm and steadfast in what you know and what you believe.
Awesome. So you did share it. Did it go? How'd it go?
The person was very appreciative.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, if he or she has a podcast and listens to him or herself and the afters, that'll correct some things pretty quickly.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You start to, especially when you're, public speaking or you've been videoed, you start to recognize the things that you do, and you're definitely aware of them. If you do listen to yourself back, for sure. But I think for this person to be taken more seriously, there's just some, they're a complete expert in their area. They just don't come across like that, which is a little bit of a shame. And I want this person to own their expertise.
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful. I think like two more things here. One, you shared a story about a front office staff that was rude.
Huh.
Yeah. So these folks need tools too, and they need awareness. Do you see a path or a set of tools that could be delivered to these individuals and that they could really receive it in a way that made sense to them, that they felt good about? I sometimes see outside consultants or trainers come into an organization and people kind of roll their eyes. They think that this person doesn't really get what's happening inside the organization. They don't understand my pressures, all of that. So where can the change come from? How can awareness be built in folks who seem to be oblivious to the way that they're treating or coming across to others?
Oh, these people definitely know how they're treating patients. They definitely know. I can't even tell you how many times they literally hung up the phone on me because I was asking for what I needed. This is my doctor's office pre-cert, the surgery I had back in November. And I had a conversation with the doctor. And I think part of it is a cultural thing. I get the sense that she's a more junior doctor to the practice. Not that she's junior by her skill set by any stretch of the imagination, just in tenure. And the gentleman who runs the practice, I think he's the hiring manager. So he's encouraging a certain type of culture. I happen to even be in there one day where the front desk staff were gossiping about a nurse that came in for an interview and how she didn't last 15 minutes in the interview. And like, they kind of made a joke about the doctor's last name. Well, I guess she got that treatment. And it's like, oh, this is making a lot of sense. You're encouraged to be jerks. So I do think that there is a toolkit they could have, but it would have to start with that doctor who manages the group to say the way in which, well, I know from a fact, after I had the conversation with my doctor, she pulled the team meeting together and said that their behavior was unacceptable. She told me she was doing it. And then when I saw her for my next appointment, she told me she had a conversation with them. And I was kind of like, I don't know if she's Googled me, but I was kind of like, you know what I do for a living, right? Like this is, and if I'm experiencing this, what is everybody else experiencing? However, I do think they could get some like training around empathy. They could get some trauma informed training where they understand the types of traumas women. This is a women's clinic. So, people are dealing with pregnancies, miscarriage, IVF, hysterectomies, a whole raft of things that could be scary or, maddening or make people angry or sad. So maybe some trauma informed training would also be helpful for them. And then really to understand what it looks like when you use, how effective using empathy is versus downright being jerks to people.
Right. Absolutely. Sadly, in some cases, I feel that people have to experience something quite traumatic themselves before they develop that empathy. Not all the time. And I do understand how if the leader is behaving this way, people tend to model that behavior. It's just like kids modeling their parents' behavior or doing the opposite,
Yeah.
So I ask all of my guests about being valued in the workplace. What should we expect in terms of being valued? What do you see? And how do you yourself feel the most valued in the work that you do, in the various ways that you work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm just going to share an experience. So, you know that I work for one of our mentors. So I am on her faculty. And I think honestly, for the first time in my life I have a boss, she's my boss for this particular thing that I do. I have felt so valued and so seen as my whole person and showing up to work when I show up for her. I don't think I have had an equivalent experience in the workplace my entire life. And that's saying something. So, and when I say that, it's like, for people who know me, I have a very dry, quick sense of humor. I'm pretty goofy and weird. I play practical jokes on people. I'm kind of out there, right? You got to kind of keep up. And I'll dance, I'll dance on stage when I'm on stage. And she's this big deal. And it could have been kind of scary, right? I show up for day one of work and I'm like dancing around the conference room we're in or whatever. And she's just like in hysterics, and then also sees how I connect the dots and sees my own genius. So, she's just like, more fun, put it out there, let's do it. And I think that's it. It's like when people are able to fully appreciate you for who you are and how you show up, I think that's the way I feel the most valued. When I'm working in corporate and I'm working with organizations, if I'm happen to be training or opening up a dialogue where we're having courageous conversations, I'll see an aha in people's faces sometimes. You can see that immediate hit of the download, I just got something. I feel super valued then. I also feel valued when we can help an organization to, move the needle, however big or small that might be. And even just a simple thank you to us is enough for me, because I know I've made an impact.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That description of the boss that you have for when you're doing that type of work, I wonder if you've both kind of evolved to a certain point where you've kind of come together at this time. And would that have happened the same way 12 years ago for either of you, in completely different places in your lives?
Definitely not. I also think I would have been a more fearful around her, because she's amazing. She's a genius, literally a genius. And I probably would have not been so quick to voice my opinions on things. I had a phone call with her today, so she's top of mind, right? And I think I also went in with open eyes to say, I have so much to learn from her, right? I have so much to learn from her and to watch how she operates. And I think part of that too is that there's a values alignment in terms of how each of us show up as human beings. And she's giving us, those of us who are on faculty for her, the space to truly be ourselves and to work with her clients in a way that really does empower the clients and hold space for them to grow as well. So it's this mutual respect, going back to respect, mutual respect and mutual ownership of our lanes as well. And, I think she also trusts that I will never intentionally do anything to put her clients in jeopardy or let her down in any way. There would be no way I would ever do that.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And your mention of values, this is definitely, I'm sure, going to come up again and again in various conversations that I have, but I feel like it can feel a little vague because a lot of organizations have been operating and kind of doing what they do.
I think it's important to have conversations with the people you work with or work for about what they value. I'm not saying everything has to be aligned. My top 5 values may not be your top 5 values, But, we have seen when we work with organizations, when there's somebody on a team where their values are a complete mismatch with the team or the organization, it doesn't work for long.
Yeah.
It just really doesn't. And so I do think it's an important conversation for people to have at all levels, or even just start doing some digging on your own. Like, what do I value right now in this season of my life? I'm not saying those values stick forever, but in this season, what's what are my values and why are they important?
Yep. And I would say too, that to someone very early to work life, that it might be really nebulous when you're first getting going. You just kind of have to get your feet wet, I think.
Yeah.
Well, this has been really awesome. I really enjoy chatting with you, Amanda, every time. So I appreciate your time. And
I appreciate you. I hope that people listening got at least one nugget out of our conversation. I know we could talk forever and maybe talk forever, particularly over wine, but
that sounds great. My nephew, USD, I am going to be visiting him. So
Yay!
I'm sure that I might be texting you in the next year or two. All right. Well, have a fantastic rest of your day and a good week. Okay. Thanks, Amanda.
It was great to see you. Bye, Linda.
Bye.
Take care.
There you have it. Episode 11 is in the books. I wanted to share a weekly observation. This relates to something that Amanda said around joy at work. The idea that we should feel joy in some aspects of our work. And actually, the initial idea for Living Blueprints almost 10 years ago focused around joy and drain. And is there space for joy in your life and your weekly life as it relates to work and just kind of like the grind, right? I noticed this week that I never seem to get enough sleep the days that I go into the office. And I think I need more sleep. And this is a real challenge. So I'm going to put the challenge to myself to get into bed a little bit earlier on the days I need to be in the office. And one of the main reasons for this, obviously, I don't want to feel groggy and not my full self. But when I don't have enough sleep, it takes away my ability to carve out that space and time for the joy. Because to be frank, my real joy is coming from aspects of like this podcast and other types of things that I'm putting into the world. And I'd really like to encourage you, to the extent that your job is not filling needs around creativity, that you're definitely getting that somewhere else in your life. If you have the benefit of your job really filling needs around creativity, hobbies, that's awesome. But I really feel like in order to be happier people, more settled, more fulfilled, we need to be able to carve out that time for the hobbies and the joy and the things that really kind of lift us. Not that we're expected to be lifted 24/7, but we really need that time and space for creative or hobbies. As always, if you have any comments, messages for me, you could either write them to me at linda@workdopepod.com or record it in a recorded message that you could record into a recording app from your phone and then attach it to an email. Again, linda@workdopepod.com. That's linda@workdopepod.com. Until next time, have a great week.